In 1945, America's economy surged an astonishing 72% as factories built weapons faster than ever seen, reshaping the world order overnight. Yet behind every boom were blockades, famine, and spiraling debt, and millions paid the hidden price for military power. These are the untold economic forces that turned wars into engines of both fortune and catastrophe. But how did conflicts transform entire civilizations? And who truly won or lost in the struggle to control the world's wealth? Naval power has always been an economic weapon. During the Napoleonic Wars, Britain's blockade of continental Europe forced merchants to find new routes. British ships skirted the Cape of Good Hope, bypassing shuttered European ports, and textile exports climbed from £37.5 million to £44.4 million over a decade. Factories in Manchester and Birmingham ran day and night, fueled by demand that had nowhere else to go. For British merchants, every closed port on the continent meant another order filled back home. But for millions across Europe and the colonies, these shifting currents brought hardship. Blockades strangled local markets, drove up prices, and left entire regions cut off from food and supplies. Visuals, period maps of trade routes, animated sea lanes, archival portraits of merchants, factory interiors, and textile mills. The Suez Canal, a narrow ribbon of water connecting east and west, saw its fate decided again in 1956. When Britain and France seized the canal, nearly 10% of the world's oil shipments hung in the balance. Shipping data from that year show a sudden spike in freight costs, rippling from London to Bombay. Control over sea lanes had become a bargaining chip in global trade. Visuals, archival footage of the Suez Canal, animated charts showing freight spikes, shipping lanes highlighted from London to Bombay. Yet the true cost of economic warfare is counted in lives as well as ledgers. In British-controlled India, wartime procurement and export policies contributed to the Bengal famine of 1943. As rice was shipped out to feed imperial armies, up to 3 million civilians died. The ledgers may have shown rising exports, but the price was measured in empty villages and silent fields. Blockades and trade controls did not just move wealth, they drew lines between survival and catastrophe. Visuals, photographs of deserted fields and empty markets, export logs on screen, maps showing blocked ports and supply routes. Northern factories thundered to life as the Civil War began. Workshops that once turned out sewing machines and farm tools switched overnight to rifles, cannons, and ironclad ships. The Union held nearly 90% of the nation's manufacturing capacity, a gap that only widened as the war dragged on. Industrialists like Andrew Carnegie and Cornelius Vanderbilt poured resources into steel mills and rail lines, feeding the relentless demand for war material. Show archive footage of workshops, portraits of Andrew Carnegie and Cornelius Vanderbilt, and shots of steel mills and riverfront foundries. Railroads became the arteries of the Union war effort. In just 4 years, Northern rail mileage jumped from 21,000 to 35,000 miles, knitting together far-flung suppliers and battlefronts. Locomotives delivered troops, ammunition, and food at speeds the Confederacy could never match. The North's sprawling network of tracks allowed generals to shift entire armies in days, not weeks. Railroads moved people and supplies with unprecedented speed. Visualize this with an animated map of rail expansion, charts showing mileage growth, and archive footage of troop trains and locomotives rolling through industrial towns. Government contracts flooded the market, drawing thousands into the workforce and unleashing a wave of technical innovation. Ironworks, foundries, and textile mills ran day and night, their smokestacks painting the sky above cities like Pittsburgh and Chicago. The scale of procurement forced even small workshops to modernize, laying the groundwork for the industrial giants of the next century. Procurement of war supplies remade work, technology, and industry. Suggested visuals include scanned government contracts, close-ups of workers on factory floors, and time-lapse shots of smokestacks and production lines. By war's end, the Union's economic engine had not just powered victory, it had transformed the North into an industrial powerhouse, setting a precedent for how conflict could drive a nation's manufacturing might. This surge in production and organization became a template that would echo through future wars and reshape the global economy. End with sweeping aerials of post-war industrial cities, comparative charts of pre-war and post-war manufacturing, and a map linking this industrial surge to later global shifts. By 1917, the United States Treasury launched the largest bond drives in American history, raising over $21 billion from citizens and banks to finance the war effort. Posters covered city walls, urging families to buy Liberty bonds and support the troops. In Washington, the War Industries Board took charge, setting quotas, fixing prices, and rationing raw materials. Wheat was pegged at $2.20 a bushel, and steel shipments were directed by government order rather than market whim. Assembly lines once devoted to cars and farm equipment shifted overnight to rifles, helmets, and artillery shells. By the war's peak, American factories turned out 3.5 million shells each month, a scale unimaginable before the conflict. A new term entered the public vocabulary, GDP, which stands for Gross Domestic Product and measured the total goods and services a nation could produce. At the same time, inflation rose as prices crept upward under the pressure of constant demand. The war's machinery was not just on the battlefield, it pulsed through every mill and bank ledger, tying finance and production tighter than ever before. Germany's defeat in World War I brought a bill no nation could pay. The Treaty of Versailles demanded 132 billion gold marks, more than the entire German economy could produce in years. Weimar policymakers faced impossible choices. To meet the Allies' terms, the Reichsbank printed money at a dizzying pace. By late 1923, prices doubled every few days. A loaf of bread that cost 250 marks in January of that year soared to 200 billion marks by November. Workers raced from the pay window to the market, desperate to buy food before wages lost value by sunset. Savings evaporated, middle-class families burned banknotes for heat, their life's work reduced to ash. The monthly inflation rate peaked near 300%, wiping out confidence in the mark. In a final gamble, the government introduced the Rentenmark, a new currency backed by land and industry, not gold. For a moment, chaos paused. But the scars from hyperinflation lingered, fueling resentment and setting the stage for an industrial response that would reshape Europe once again. Detroit's factories ran without pause, stamping out tanks and trucks by the thousands. The War Production Board, created in 1942, took command of the American industrial machine, channeling raw materials and manpower into a single purpose. Overwhelming output. In just 5 years, the United States produced over 300,000 aircraft, enough to fill the skies from London to the Pacific. Shipyards launched 2,710 Liberty ships. Each one was built faster than the last. Assembly line methods cut construction time from 8 months to 6 weeks. The Willow Run plant turned out a new B-24 bomber every hour, while Ford and General Motors retooled for war, their assembly lines stretching for miles. Lend-Lease shipments poured across the Atlantic and Pacific. $50.1 billion in aid supplied allies with everything from locomotives to canned meat. By 1945, American factories accounted for 72% of the world's GDP. This was not simply a surge in production, but a transformation. The United States became the world's arsenal, its economic might measured in tonnage, horsepower, and the unbroken rhythm of machines. The blueprint for superpower status was forged not just on battlefields, but in the relentless drive of planners, foremen, and workers who turned industry into the engine of victory. The end of World War II brought not just rubble and relief, but a new economic order shaped by wartime institutions and ambitions. In 1948, the United States launched the Marshall Plan, sending $12.4 billion in aid to rebuild Western Europe. This was more than charity. It was a blueprint for stable markets and friendly governments anchored by American industry and finance. Aid agreements tied reconstruction to United States supply chains, turning former battlefields into customers for American steel, machinery, and grain. But the machinery of war never fully powered down. Defense budgets remained high, and a permanent military-industrial complex took root. In 1961, President Eisenhower warned that the potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. Behind that warning stood a network of contractors and scientists whose work blurred the line between military and civilian life. Wartime research spilled over into daily existence. Penicillin, mass-produced in deep fermentation tanks built for the front, soon filled hospital shelves worldwide. Navigation systems first designed to guide missiles, the network that would become GPS, quietly reshaped how people travel, farm, and communicate. The economic patterns of war lived on in peace, seeding industries and innovation that outlasted the conflicts themselves. Suggested visuals include archival maps of post-war Europe, footage of factories retooled for civilian production, charts of aid flows and defense spending, Close-ups of fermentation tanks and hospital shelves, early computer labs and satellite tracking, and maps showing trade routes shifting after the war. The final tally of war is not just measured in rebuilt cities or booming industries, but in the debts that remain long after the guns fall silent. Over the last 2 centuries, the average debt to GDP ratio for countries involved in major conflicts has climbed by 47 percentage points. This burden lingers, shaping budgets and futures for generations. In 2023, global military spending soared to $2.44 trillion, the highest since the Cold War, with the United States alone accounting for nearly $900 billion. Defense outlays now absorb over 3% of the U.S. economy, echoing the patterns set during the World Wars, but without the same post-war windfalls. For every new submarine or missile contract, taxpayers shoulder a growing share of the bill. The IMF warns that advanced economies now carry debt averaging 112% of GDP, a level that squeezes out spending on schools, hospitals, and infrastructure. The world's leading economies, once rebuilt by wartime innovation, now face the quiet pressure of interest payments and deficit ceilings. The winners of past conflicts walk a narrowing path, balancing security with the silent costs of perpetual preparedness. Today, global military spending has surpassed $2.4 trillion, fueling new industries and risks alike. As economies pivot with each conflict, the line between destruction and opportunity blurs. In every surge and collapse, the true cost of war is still being written, in markets, in nations, and in lives.